Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here, and going over the next set of lesson and setting up for chapter 15. I don't want to go into too much with chapter 14 because really there's nothing too new about it. Just more of the same. The only difference is the Crusades, and there is a little bit more to the Crusades, but usually it's something I kind of don't really touch on. But I do feel like I wanted to share one thing about chapter 14 before we start talking about the Renaissance, because it is kind of in some ways, this pandemic is something that we haven't seen since the influenza experienced, the what was called the Spanish flu back in 1917 into 1918. And but there's been a lot of graphs and different types of numbers thrown out, and one pandemic that kind of fits to what we're talking about in world history is the Black Death, or the plague, during the late to mid 1300s into the 1400s. So we're going to kind of talk about that, and it also kind of helps set up the Renaissance. So we're going to talk more about that here. I do have a Google form on the website, so the questions are there as well. But if you want to write them down, so as we go through this video, you can, mark the answers. So here we go. Question one is, what was going on in Europe before the Black Death? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the years in particular that we're talking about that swept across the continent to infect every country. We're going to talk about where were its origins, or the Black Death's origins. What were the symptoms to the Black Death? How many Europeans, I should put, died? A little correction. We all make mistakes. How many Europeans died due to the Black Death? We're going to get into that as well. And then finally, number 6, we're going to talk about what were the effects of the Black Death. There are some, and one of those is actually in chapter 15, which is the whole Renaissance chapter to begin with. So we're going to talk about that, but let's just go ahead and jump right in. So what we have to understand is that before the Black Death, pretty much in the early 1300s, throughout most of the continent, the Europe wasn't really focused on disease. We're really not going to see Europe really start to focus on disease until not even close to right around at least the 1800s, sometime right around the late 1800s, or mid to late 1800s, when cholera hit London, especially. That's when really London at that point in time started to realize, oh, so you're telling me hygiene is really affecting my health, and that I have to actually wash my hands. I have to be concerned about the overcrowdedness of the city. I have to worry about bacteria. Like it, that kind of gives you a bit of some context here. What's going on? We're talking about early 1300s, mid 1800s. That's roughly about 500 years. And they were just now figuring out that their bacteria was actually affecting their health and could hurt them and kill them. So what we're learning here, and what we're going to learn, is that it takes a long time for information to pass on or be carried or documented. And that plays a big difference in the health of our society and your guys' health. It is so much better now than it was even 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. So be grateful that we're in a country where, and also in a state around the world where everybody's sharing information, that information's available, or most information's available, and that you are able to get at least some sense of what's going on around the world. But Europe wasn't even worried or thinking about disease. They weren't even thinking about, oh, whether or not this disease is going to kill me, or if I could get sick, and sick enough to where I could die. I mean, they knew that it was possible, but they weren't even worried about it, to a level and extent. At least, especially those who had strong immune systems. The thing is that what was going on mostly around Europe was you had the church, the Roman Catholic Church was mostly dealing with heresy. People misrepresenting the faith, or in their eyes, misrepresenting the faith, and speaking badly about their leadership. Also, really going against certain individuals and how they practice their faith, or even those who weren't Christians. So there was some that mostly going on throughout Europe. And then also we see in 1328 the Hundred Years' War, which during the Black Death, this war continued to go on, because we're going to see the Black Death really start to hit right around the late 1330s. And this war is still going on throughout the Black Death. But there was a lot of major conflict going on. Certain wars were going on, but especially the Hundred Years' War with England and France was going on. So the conflict with each other was more the concern, except the conflict with the virus. So that became a bit of an issue, and it wouldn't be. We wouldn't find out more about the Black Death until later on, until it was over. So yes, the Hundred Years' War seemed to be a major crisis at the time in Europe, because you are dealing with two major countries who are trying to build these huge, massive kingdoms. France being one, England being the other, and affecting all of Europe. But really, they were unaware of the biggest crisis of all that was going to hit in Europe, and that was the Black Death, which started to sweep through Europe and started to prove that this was going to be a much bigger problem than any war, that this was going to take more lives than any war. And so from 1347 to 1351, we start to see, within a span of 4 years, the Black Death kind of make its way from the east and come to the west. I should probably say, come from the east and then make its way to the west. Slowly but surely, nobody was immune to the Black Death, to the plague. Every country was going to be hit by this. The whole continent, the whole eastern continents were covered with the Black Plague. So this caused a lot of problems. There is not a lot of certainty exactly what disease it was. We don't know if this was like some form of a flu. We don't know if this was some minor virus that eventually got out of hand. We don't know all of that. But what we do understand is, based off of the documentation of the plague and what others had, written about it, we have taken that documentation, some of those writings, and some of the experts have been able to figure out some of the numbers and make certain conclusions about what you might have expected. There's the one theory that the bubonic plague, it spread through fleas who were on top of rats, who lived on rats and on other animals, that got onto humans, who then would, because the fleas would bite our skin, and then they would transmit that disease into us, and then we would carry it on. The other was pneumonic plague. It spread through the air from person to person. I think that it's a combination of both. That this Black Death, this plague, started out with fleas, and that it was carried on, as we're going to learn, it was carried on ships by merchants, who then, where the fleas were infecting others or getting on other, certain things or surfaces that we make contact with other people, and then eventually mutated into a person-to-person type of scenario. And I do think that is possible, that we might have seen with the bubonic plague, that eventually mutated into where it could be passed from, us breathing on each other. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why, when it comes to this coronavirus, why they're saying do the social distancing, the 6 feet, distance, because they're concerned that this, especially with this coronavirus that we're dealing with now, is that you can transmit this face to face with these, because you have to understand, our bacteria is everywhere. It's on our face, it's on our mouth, and this type of bacteria that, especially if you're asymptomatic and you don't even know that you're carrying it because it's not affecting you, or affecting you, your droplets could accidentally get on somebody else, and that could infect them and give them. And so I think that's why there's the social distancing of separation, trying to make sure to avoid that face-to-face contact, because you don't want to accidentally give someone the virus, because and that's the thing. That's part of the reason why the new recommendation of the face mask is the droplets might get somewhere, and how long they'll survive on a surface. You never know how much you're touching it. So it's just things like that. That type of information that we have now, you kind of wonder, man, if Europe had this information back then, maybe millions upon millions of people wouldn't have died. And you're probably right. So it's crazy how information works. Now the origins of it. This dates all the way back to 1346. The Mongols, they are attacking the Black Sea. They are sieging. Um, we see that. This was supposed to be C. As you can see, I sometimes make mistakes. The the Mongols were attacking the Black Sea and the ports that are run by Italian merchants. And what ended up happening is the Mongols actually got infected with the bubonic plague. And so what ended up happening is that they decided to use their soldiers to basically kind of like chemical warfare in some ways, basically taking their soldiers, catapulting them over the fences and infecting the individuals, getting them sick enough to where they could attack and take over. But what the Mongols don't understand is, yeah, it worked. They were able to conquer the ports, but they ultimately started this timeline of where just the disease is just going to spread and spread and spread and spread. And eventually those fleas that were coming from the Mongols got into the ships, the seaports, and then eventually those fleas infected other humans because of the merchants spreading the fleas from the rats being on there. And eventually it started spreading from person to person to person to the point where everybody got the plague. I'm going to show this clip here real quick. It's not going to take too long, but I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about. This is talking about the plague and the Mongols. Now, Genghis Khan, I believe it's his grandson, is the one who may have been the one to spread it. I don't know all the facts. We don't know 100% for sure, but this is from Mankind, and based on their information, this is what they believe actually did occur. But watch as the Genghis Khan's grandson uses his dead soldiers who carry the plague to infect others. So here I'm going to play it and just kind of we see the information here.
The fleas that carry the plague hitch a lift from one of our closest companions, the black rat. Native to Asia, they spread to Europe with the Romans. From a pair of rats, 2,000 new offspring a year. And every rat can carry 8 plague-infected fleas. Black rats infest the cargo that travels along the Mongol trade routes. Spreading out from Issyk-Kul, the plague sweeps east to China and west towards Europe. Kaffa on the Black Sea, a thriving port at the crossroads of east and west, controlled by Italian merchants. One man is credited with speeding the plague into Europe. A descendant of Genghis Khan, Jani Beg. He murdered his own brother to seize power. Now he wants to expand the Mongol Empire westwards. Kaffa stands in his way. But he has a terrible new weapon. The plague kills his soldiers faster than they can be replaced. But that gives Janny Bag an idea. His dead men become ammunition.
Biological warfare wasn't entirely new. In the 6th century BC, both the Assyrians and the Greeks used to poison wells. But at Kaffa, the Mongols took it another stage. They launched it physically, like a chemical bomb.
Biological weapons are so deadly, they've been outlawed in 165 countries, including Russia and the United States. But it is thought more than enough remain to wipe out mankind in a stroke. No one has ever used biological weapons like Janny Bag. One chronicler writes,
what seemed like mountains of dead were thrown into the city. The rotted corpses tainted the air. The stench was overwhelming.
There can be no weapon that is as terrifying as what is unleashed with biological warfare. You cannot see germs. You cannot see disease. And nothing you can do can make you immune to it.
the inhabitants of Kaffa try to outrun the plague and flee to Europe. They have no idea they're bringing the disease with them. The plague, en route to the world's most densely populated continent.
And so there we go. And so as you can see in the video, it's kind of like what we're dealing with now in with the coronavirus situation. I mean, in Europe and Italy, word had got out that that northern Italy was infected with coronavirus, and guess what? A lot of people from the north fled south to where it wasn't a big problem, and almost created another hotspot, which it's not looking too great, but it's getting better for Italy. But that's kind of the concern. And the thing is that, in these situations, when you have like the plague or any sort of set virus like this that's getting out of control, the best thing you do is to be aware where it is and contain it. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. As you saw there, the Mongols forced a lot of those people out. They were running away, just trying to get away. And some of those individuals carried the plague into Europe in these dense populated areas. And, and ultimately what it ends up happening is, and what's funny is you think that the rural areas would be safe, but some of the rural areas got hit really hard. And as we're going to learn the effects, it's going to change everything. So it wasn't just a metropolitan or like a city problem. It was also a Europe problem everywhere. So it was a big, massive issue. But that is pretty much a lot of its origins. And ultimately, when the disease took course, it started to head in there. It was a very fatal disease. We don't know the exact death rate, but this was pretty high. It was pretty high death rates, which some experts believe it could have been somewhere between 30% to 60% those who had it were dead. It had a pretty high death rate. I would have to say it was more right around 30, just a little over 30%. Maybe not at the level of 60%, but it's definitely in that high 30%, definitely over 30%. So, but and the thing is, again, we don't know all the symptoms, and we don't know exactly the disease particularly. But based on the writings, based on the doctors and their writings, if a person was infected, they had dark splotches, these little pus, uh, the pockets that build up in their skin, high fever, vomiting, severe headaches. So this was a really bad thing. This kept you stuck in your bed for a long time, and probably to a point where you couldn't move. So this was bad, and it spread easily, and because of the lack of protective gear, that we see, PPE, personal protective equipment, there was not very much PPE. And so you would see that priests and doctors were pretty much vulnerable individuals, because the priests would visit these individuals to pray on them, to comfort them, and to just to see what needs they need during this time of sickness. And a doctor, obviously, there to care for them. And we see that a lot of these individuals who are carrying the sick would get it themselves and die. That's why eventually you would see the plague doctor. There's the mask with the long nose, the plague doctor mask that was created to prevent them from getting sick. Now, probably at first, the mask was used to maybe protect them from the mostly using the high potent medicine. As you can see here, this is what I'm talking about, these famous masks. I know a lot of you think, oh, it looks like a cool crow mask or whatever, but it's actually a plague doctor mask. And the idea was that they were using very high potent like medicine, like things that were very smelly and kind of just really sensitive to the nose. But also, I think what the doctors eventually, what the experts end up realizing, is that these masks did protect them from the individuals, not just from the chemicals they're using or whatever methods they're using, but it ended up protecting them from the people who got sick. But the plague doctor mask eventually became popular during this time of the Black Death. But we also see, because the disease spread so quickly, and it was also a lot of people got it, and it was deadly. We saw a third of Europe's population died, about 25 million, and then it killed 35 million in China. So this was a pretty deadly disease and caused a lot of problems. The effects of it is that during the time of the plague, a lot of people felt like, because you have to understand, this is the rise of the Roman Catholic Church. The church is very popular. There's a lot of belief of, you've got to follow God, you got to follow Him well. If you don't, then then you're sinning, and that's going to cause problems for you. So when the plague happened, a lot of people felt like they were being punished by God, that this was a punishment by God. This was apocalyptic type plague for their sins. So a lot of people panicked. A lot of people were concerned. You saw some people dip into like superstition and dark magic to kind of heal themselves, which obviously was mostly out of fear, and just not really thinking. We see a lot of anger. A lot of individuals blame the Jews. They blame that the Jews were punishing them, or may have uh, really trying to get back at Christians. Very anti-Semitic methods. Felt like the Jews were, going after Christians just because of anti-Semitism, and other methods and other reasoning. It was just false, and it's just mostly fear is what played a role. And sadly, a lot of Jewish communities got destroyed because of people's fears. Also, we see a lot of peasants died from this, and this caused a lot of problems in the economy for Europe. It changed a lot, and it definitely, once it was over, the plague had ended. We see that this was going to change agriculture, because the workers that were left, there was only very few of them, and they realized hey, there's only like 5 of us when there was like maybe 50. So, you know, or maybe 25 of us. Either way, um, there's less now, and that means there's more money available. So pay us a high wage, and we'll stay here to work. Well, you know, some individuals couldn't pay that, and so a lot of these workers are like, "Fine, I'm done. I'm done being a servant. I'm done working the fields. I'm going into the cities, and I'm going to do a manufacturing job." And that's what ends up changing in Europe. Is that on the other side of this, we see the manual system that we talked about, the fact that you would hire somebody or have someone to work the fields. That pretty much destroyed the manual system. We see workers are quitting; they're not doing the agricultural work, and they're heading off and going into the cities to take on those jobs that are now open because of their manufacturing and looking for a better life. And we see that with more land and less labor, you're starting to see that these individuals had to go a more efficient route, a more effective route. Um, we start to see that the agriculture change and that you had to do different types of methods in order to figure out how am I going to be able to harvest this crop or get this crop harvest. So so not only did it change the economy, but it also it changed the way we live. I think we start to see a little bit more of a sense of, okay, how do I protect myself, and just being a little bit more aware of when someone is sick. This is pretty much where the God bless you, the when somebody sneezes, bless you, because you were afraid that they may have had the plague. So we start to see a little bit more of awareness of somebody being sick and what that can do to us and the fear of that. I don't know if you saw a lot of the hygiene practices, like I said, going into even into the late 1800s, during the time of or the mid 1800s, during the time of cholera outbreak in London. London was pretty gross and disgusting and overcrowded. We still had a lot of bad hygiene practices, but eventually we're going to see when we do get to that point that experts are able to say, wash your hands, take care of yourself. And it's kind of funny, like when we look at this coronavirus situation, I mean, you know, you think that most everybody washes their hands, or most everybody is considering, what do I touch? How do I, how do I avoid touching my face? And, really being conscious of their hygiene, making sure you're taking care of your clothes and being sure that you're washing them every day. But, not everybody seems to be as informed. And that's where we're starting to see the messages come out about the social distancing, the washing your hands, the being aware of these illnesses, getting the vaccinations that you need to get, like your flu vaccine. Hopefully they come up with a coronavirus pretty soon. I'm hoping so, but it just it's going to take probably several more months. I'm hoping not a year, but this is kind of a warning sign of what things are going to what things what things can be like if we don't take these types of procedures and methods serious. Um, Now, look, I'm not saying the coronavirus is going to be the Black Plague, and I don't want you to believe that. And I do think that the times are different today than they were back then. We have technology now, so it's a lot easier to spread out information faster, to get it elsewhere. And yeah, this virus spread pretty quickly. And a lot of it has to do more with the type of virus it is, than less of the fact that you know the contact and necessarily so much how, not so much why. I it's just kind of this is a new type of virus and it's different, but the good thing is we have enough information to where we have a chance to flatten the curve and get us to a level where we can start to contain it more, be able to do the testing that we need to, and be okay. And I think we're going to bounce back. We're going to be fine. It may take a few more months after this whole thing kind of dies down, but eventually the economy is going to bounce back as long as we get this thing under control. We should be okay. And here's the good thing. Here's the good news. You look at what happened to the Black Death. When we talk about in chapter 15 with the Renaissance, even though as sadly as 25 million people died, the after the Black Death, it opened up a lot of things for the Europeans and the societies, and it brought hope. and there was a lot more hope in life following the Black Death with the Renaissance, and that's what we're going to talk about. And hopefully what I see once this whole thing's over, we're going to see a little bit more of that hope after the coronavirus scare. So pandemic. The pandemic here, the coronavirus will not be at the level of the Black Death, but we're going to learn a lot of lessons and things that hopefully in the future we can save more lives. But anyway, I feel like it's important to kind of share this lesson a little bit more, especially it's a kind of a precursor of what we're going to talk about in chapter 15, because the Black Death does play a role in the Renaissance. So we're going to talk about that next. So be sure to check that out. Again, if you need to email me about any questions, feel free to do so. Email me at weinlandp@manford.k12.ok.us. All right, I'll see you guys.